All right, thanks, Nate. My name's Dan Ebener, and I've been doing focus groups for United Way the past couple of months for the Income Council, and we've focus group interviewed 85 people from 5 different focus groups involving mostly homeless themselves and homeless and low-income families around the Quad Cities, and from some very interesting findings. I've been working with homeless and low-income populations in the Quad Cities since the mid-1980s, and very familiar with the needs that a lot of families have for child care and health care, transportation needs. How do you pay for schools, and how do you get a better job, and how do you cover the kids' expenses? But there were some new challenges that I found in these focus groups, and the usual concerns of how do we overcome obstacles like mental health and substance abuse, domestic violence. Those certainly came up in the discussions, but there were some new things. Particular emphasis on the need for how do we compete for college graduates and other young adults out there that are applying for jobs when we have felony convictions in our background, or when we how do we get an apartment when we've been kicked out of one apartment and an eviction notice shows up on your background check. Background checks in general were one thing that came up that was something fairly new from before. Child support stories. I found it very interesting. The mothers, of course, very concerned, single moms, that they're not getting as much child support from their fathers or their children as they need to. But in addition to that, I've heard some really interesting stories from the fathers. Listen to this story. There are 4 guys at the Humility of Mary shelter. And these guys get picked up around 9 p.m. every night and go to Iowa City. And it's basically a 12-hour operation. They get to Iowa City, and about 10:30 they find out whether they've got a job or not. And 80% of the time they get a job, 20% of the time they don't get a job and have to just sit in a waiting room and wait until the bus coming back to Davenport at about 8 a.m. And so they get back in Davenport about 9 o'clock in the morning. So basically you got a 12-hour day there. They get paid $8 an hour to do hard work in a warehouse. So 8 hours times $8 an hour, they're making about $64. After taxes, and after they have to pay for the bus to get to Iowa City and back, they're basically down to about $40 payment for that eight hours of work. And then the way they were explaining it to me, since all 4 of them were fathers, they have to hold half of their payment for child support. And so they basically come back to the Quad Cities with $20 in their pocket for 8 hours of work in a 12-hour day. And so they were just basically running the numbers and saying, how do you make this work? You make $20 a day. So if you do that 5 days a week, that's $100 a week. You figure you do that 50 weeks of the year, that's $5,000 a year. Who can make it on $5,000 a year? So the numbers just aren't working for some people, particularly when I'm hearing that rents are very high given the Quad Cities market. So it's hard to find an apartment for $5,000 a year. It's usually $600–700 a month for an apartment, and if you have to add utilities to that, just do the math and see how difficult it is to make a living on either the $7.25 minimum wage in Iowa or the $8.25 minimum wage in Illinois. So in Iowa, the minimum wage would give you about $15,100 a year. In Illinois, it's about $17,300 per year. If you do 40 hours a week, 52 weeks out of the year, that's about what you're making. Let's figure this math. So if your housing is $500 or $600 a month, that's $6,000 or $7,000 a year. If your utilities are, if you're really good and keep it down to say $100 a month, now you're at $7,000 or $8,000 of that $15,000 or $17,000 you've got per year. Now you add things like food, clothing, gasoline for your car, medical care, dental care, eye care. If you've got kids and you've got to put them in daycare, that's going to chop off about half of what you're making right there. How are you going to cover tuition if you want to go back to school, which many of these families said they wanted to? So in any additional, like any kind of family crisis, just throws the whole family budget into a whirl. A car repair. One of the families that was at the Salvation Army Family Shelter said her whole downward spiral began when her car broke down. Her car broke down, she couldn't make it to work. She lost her job, She couldn't pay for her rent. She loses her apartment. Now she's homeless. And she's got 2 kids, ends up in the family shelter at the Salvation Army. Kids need glasses or boots or a coat. What if they want to join a traveling team to play soccer? I mean, where do families come up with any of this kind of money, if they're living on a minimum wage, or even, I mean, do the math on $10 an hour. And it really isn't very affordable for Quad City families to try to make a living. So these were the stories, the kind of stories that I was hearing. Heard a lot of stories also about veterans. Okay, my first focus group was with 25 veterans, and before the whole VA issue blew up as a national story, we were hearing here locally from our veterans that basically the same thing. They're very frustrated with the system. There are a lot of bureaucratic rules, a lot of waiting times to get in to see someone, particularly for health care needs, and they can't compete. They can't compete for the jobs that are out there. They're looking for what they call a career job. Most people out there who are in homeless shelters are looking for what they would call a career job, something that they can do for the rest of their lives, make a living, be able to support a family, give back to the community. A lot of them mention giving back to the community as being a goal of theirs. And I have to say that I picked up on a real sense of anger among our veterans. Anger that, you know, they went over and fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, somewhere, you know, put their lives on the line, got in harm's way, and now they come back, can't find a job, can't get services they need. It's very, very frustrating for them. There was a lot of anger expressed, particularly at elected officials over the whole deal. A disproportionate number of our single adult males have always been homeless. This has been true since the 1970s. This is not something new in this particular setting, but it continues to be true. That about half of the single adult male homeless population folks in our shelters are veterans. That's where our veterans are ending up. So need to do something about all that. Let's see. Some of the other issues that came up, chronic mental illness. Okay, how do we deal with chronic mental illness, particularly among parents? Most of the people that I interviewed, okay, so I interviewed 80 people who were either homeless or very low income, and virtually every one of them was a parent. All 9 of the people I interviewed at the Salvation Army shelter were mothers. All 11 of the people I interviewed at the Humility of Mary shelter were parents. Okay, so they were either moms or dads. So this is what my point is, that if the adults are dealing with homelessness, and if they, particularly a lot of them, have chronic mental illness and substance abuse issues on top of that, and the women have domestic violence issues on top of all of that, who's taking care of the kids? I mean, in order to take care of the kids in these situations, we've got to take care of mom and dad. So that was one of the clear messages I came back with from the focus groups, is that we've got to do more to take care of the parents of the kids that are out there. So so bus routes were one of the things that I would suggest came out of this whole discussion, because there were a lot of frustration about transportation in the Quad Cities. If you don't have a car, it's hard to get a job. And it's hard to get a job, by the way, if you don't have a driver's license, and it's hard to get a driver's license if you've got felony convictions and bad driving records in your background, all of which are obstacles that come up in these focus groups. But bus routes are something that I think United Way can do something about. So a lot of these things, you know, are such big areas, you know, changing the minimum wage, getting the Veterans Administration to be more responsive to the needs of our veterans, being able to take care of, you know, a lot of the big kind of economic problems that these families are dealing with, might be out of the range of what United Way of the Quad Cities can do. But one thing I think United Way could do is try to leverage some of our influence on changing the bus routes, getting the buses in the Quad Cities to work for people who don't necessarily have a job that runs between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Because a lot of the jobs, particularly like at APAC or at Tyson, those are the kind of jobs that a lot of these folks are looking at. They're just not available. The hours that they need to work don't fit into the bus schedule of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So doing something about bus routes would be one of my suggestions to United Way. Number 2 would be case management. Okay, case management has always been one of the fortes of United Way, is to provide that basic social service of managing a case, a family, helping them work through the whole system, the bureaucracy of welfare, of support services, of trying to get the housing they need, and the assistance they need, the support they need as a family. So case management would be another suggestion I would make. And then the third thing would be just be mental health. I think that a lot of these families are dealing with mental health and substance abuse issues, and I'd like to see United Way deal more with the adult homeless population, the adult population in particular. So those are some of the things that I came up with out of these focus group reports. It was a very humbling experience. And I feel humbled to be able to tell these stories to you on this videotape, because these 80 plus people who were part of my focus groups entrusted me to try to pass these stories on. And I don't think I did anywhere near the justice they need to tell their stories. But read my report and go out and listen to some of these families yourselves, because I think as United Way board members, United Way supporters that are listening to this message, we all need to be the eyes and ears of our community and try to figure out what's going on in our community and lead, bring about some kind of change so that we can empower these families to get the jobs that they need and get back on their feet, and so that they can become contributing members of our community. So Nate, that's all I've got. Thanks a lot.